fast. Man, the energy in this room is amazing. Look at all these smiling faces. Good morning. My name is Chris Zanoni, and I serve on the Membership Connections team, the Communications team, and the Personnel Committee. One thing I love about this congregation is the sense of connections and community, and I'm feeling that especially today. It's an idea of friends like family and family like friends. So my experience has been that connecting and community really is created by being together and doing things together, like being here on Sunday, like singing in the choir, see some choir members out there, like being in the book club, I see our fearless leader Lori out there, being in a Soul Matters group or covenant group, and I see our fearless leader out there and some of my fellow members, and even putting chairs away at the end of a service. Those are the kinds of things that by doing together, we build community. And so to me, that is friends who are like family. And today, for me, it's also family who are like friends. And I'm pleased to be able to say that besides Tom, whom all of you know, back in there, son Josh, visiting from San Diego, and his partner Eddie, who is like a son, and second oldest Grand is in the back of the room. So I get, yeah. So in that case, we have family who are like friends. So today is a lovely culmination of both of those for me. I appreciate that we're sharing this time together. So, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. I want to take a moment to extend a very warm welcome to anyone who's visiting us for the first time. If you're joining us online, I invite you to fill out a visitor form in the link in the description. We would love to connect with you. To give you some idea of what we're all about, let me tell you about our mission. We say that here we connect bravely, deepen spiritually, embody justice, and always love. What we mean is that this community is inviting you into our shared time together today, but it's also inviting you into a way of life, a way of being in the world that may transform you. We want to grow as individuals and to welcome more people into this community. And we want to help you in your personal dream to make the world and your life better. So, there you go, church in a nutshell. So I have two invitations this morning. First, the first Sunday of each month, our amazing staff hosts an Exploring UUCB conversation after the service in the listening room. That's the room just back there behind the back rows. So that really is a time to get to know each other and to bring any questions you might have about this congregation or what we do. Second invitation is after the service, but before you even get a cup of coffee. I invite you to complete a skills and interest survey we're asking everyone in this community to fill out. You'll find that at the table next to the coffee, and I understand that there's an incentive to complete that. It's that food goes better with complete a survey. Thank you. I want to be sure I got the tagline correct. So as we grow as a church, this really is an important tool in staying connected. So we want you to tell us what your interests are so we can help to match folks together. Tell us what it is that you enjoy doing and what you're good at or you have a background in or interest in so we can help to put folks together, and also so we don't ask you to do something that you don't like to do. And so please do that. Keep that in mind. And as I said, that's right after the service. And Reverend David has one more announcement.
Oh, on this gray, cold, humid day, I feel so at home with my little New England self. Someone was telling me, I really like this. This is a nice change of pace. This is a great change of pace. People in other parts of the country, I am so sorry. I do have one announcement to share, which is many of you may have seen this by email, but our music director, Johnny Nichols Jr., resigned unexpectedly this last week. He worked here half-time, just starting over the summer, and he also worked full-time running the Denver Gay Men's Chorus. And some of you, I know some folks at the 9 a.m. service were at that performance last night and said it was astounding. But it was too much. It was just too much altogether, and there wasn't time and capacity to do both of those jobs well and take care of himself in the way that we all need to. So he stepped down with love and respect and admiration for this community. And I'll say for my part, I am sad to see him go, and I understand, and I'm sad to see him go, and I keep going back and forth around with all of that. I share these words to open our service. These by the minister Rebecca Edmiston-Lange, words I come back to often. Come in. Come into this place which we make holy by our presence. Come in with all your vulnerabilities and strengths, your fears and anxieties and loves and hopes. For here you need not hide, nor pretend, nor be anything other than who you are and who you're called to become. Come into this place where we can heal and be healed, forgive and be forgiven. Come into this place where the ordinary is sanctified, and the human is celebrated, and the compassionate is expected. Come into this place together. We make it a holy place. We rise in body or in spirit. Let's start singing together. This is Here on the Paths of Every Day.
Friend Carrie. You know what's coming next. So each week when we gather, we light our chalice, just as 1,000 other congregations do each week around this country. It's a symbol of our Unitarian Universalist past, present, and future. It's a visible reminder of our interconnection. I'm delighted to, invite Carrie Wingert to light this morning's chalice.
As you can see from my overeager ascension to the pulpit, my name is Carrie Wingert, and I have a bit of anxiety. Unrelatedly to the anxiety, I serve on the worship team, the family ministry team here. And this morning I'd like to talk a bit about how this community is my anxiety antidote. This year, in February, dear Reverend Lydia Ferranti Roseberry gave a sermon here that I really needed. Like many of us, I get overwhelmed and angry and triggered at the stream of injustices and fear that can come at you. In that sermon, she reminded us that we have a responsibility, not just for fun, a responsibility to put equal effort into joy and love as we do putting into the worry. As an antidote to a trigger, she suggested awe, not but awe, A-W-E, wonder, and radical self-love. I had heard about self-care before, but she was able from the pulpit here to tie joy with our covenant responsibility to do right by each other. And I really heard her in that moment. It echoed with some ancestral wisdom from my own mom, whose catchphrase is, keep your happy, except like fight for your happy, that you're worth it, that your happiness and your community are worth it. So, emerging from the building transformed, like I often do, I started writing 3 things a day I was grateful for. Sunshine, not like today. Tasty coffee, which as a parent was a frequent entry. Releasing a butterfly. The person who let me merge in traffic. The people who pick up my compost. Mundane, maybe, but life-changing also. Things that brought me wonder, satisfaction, curiosity. The journal energized an antidote to dread and anxiety for me. And it's become a bit of a practice at home, too, asking each other about the things we enjoyed, saying what we notice when we notice it. And I think my brain has changed a bit, that my internal compass points a little less toward fear and a little more toward wonder, a little more toward hope. Even my therapist remarked she could tell by my comments that something had shifted, that I had noticed or was remarking on these small happinesses by April. Ross Gay writes about how delight is actually joy that is shared. And so I share this with you and light this chalice in gratitude for a community that helps me keep my happy.
Keep your happy. You gotta like that. Our covenant is the promise we make to each other about how we will be together in community. It is simple. It is also demanding. In person and online, let's join together as one to speak it aloud. All right. We gather in fellowship to speak truth to each other, to reach out and touch one another, to care with each other, and to speak the truth divine. So be it.
Take a breath with me. This is slowing down and arriving in this moment, moving into a space for prayer and meditation. Each week in the service, we do different sorts of things. We sit in silence together. We read poetry. We imagine. We send our attention to different parts of our heart, to different parts of our body, different parts of our spirit. Always in prayer and meditation, I so often start by inviting you into silence. Take a breath. Find a way to sit where your body doesn't intrude too much on you. But at the same time, the goal of this work is not to transcend the fact that you are in a body and a person and in a room with everyone else. The invitation into silence is not an assignment that you need to complete perfectly, as if, though desperately having to cough, you save that for later on. I've done that many times. Yeah. The invitation into silence is really about an invitation into attention, into paying attention to yourself, and an invitation into connection too. The work when we do prayer and meditation in a space like this isn't for the rest of the world to disappear and you to be in this perfectly isolated place where no one else exists. We're here, we're finding reconnection with ourselves and reconnection with each other too, In that spirit, I invite you into a time for prayer and meditation, and I share these words by the poet Anne Alexander Bingham. It is enough. It is enough to know that the atoms of my body will remain, to think of them rising through the roots of a great oak, to live in leaves, branches, twigs, perhaps to feed the crimson peony, the blue iris, the broccoli, or rest on water, freeze and thaw with seasons. Some atoms might become a bit of fluff on the wing of a chickadee, to feel the breeze and know the support of air. And some might drift up and up into space, stardust returning from whence it came. It is enough to know that as long as there is a universe, I am a part of it. We'll be together in silence for a few moments. Amen. Our commitment to connect bravely with one another means that we are called, we are invited to be glad with those who rejoice and to weep with those who mourn. And each week we set aside time in this service to make visible in ritual the joys and the sorrows that are shaping our lives right now. And for those meeting in person, I invite you to come forward as you feel moved. When the music begins, silently take a stone and place it into the sacred earth. Let that stone be a symbol of your joys, your sorrows, your grief, your hope, all of it. And how they do not stand alone, but take their place in a community held in the hand of the earth. I invite you to come forward as you feel moved. Of all the challenges we could have, too many people wanting to share their cares and their joys and put that together. It's a good problem to have. Let's sing together a little bit more. This is one many of you know. This is Blue Boat Home. And someone told me this is the Unitarian free bird. But for all that, it is a lovely thing, and a lovely thing to join in singing. We'll stay seated, and I invite you, stay seated and settle in deep. And to the degree that you do know the words, close your eyes and listen at just exactly the same time as you're singing, as much as you can. You just want to sit in that for a little bit. In 1838, the Reverend Abner Kneeland went to jail in Massachusetts. He had first been a Baptist and then a Universalist, and finally a free thinker, not part of any church by the time of the trial. Kneeland believed in radical notions for the time, like people having rights, women owning property or being allowed to divorce their husbands, racial equality, the right to interracial marriage. But while those notions may have deeply bothered the judge, that wasn't what he went to jail for. In 1838, Abner Kneeland was the last person in the United States to go to jail for the crime of blasphemy. At the time, the law in Massachusetts stated, whoever willfully blasphemes the holy name of God by denying, cursing, or contumeliously reproaching God, his creation, government, or final judging of the world, shall be punished by imprisonment in jail of not more than 1 year or by a fine of not more than $300. The Massachusetts state constitution guaranteed religious freedom, and the state also had a law against blasphemy, and the judge reasoned that because so many of the state legislators who had voted to adopt the blasphemy law were the same people who had voted for the state constitution shortly beforehand, that the guarantee of religious freedom should not be interpreted to stop anti-blasphemy laws. And while state laws like this, they were all over the place, up and down the colonies, were enforced with less and less frequency, they persisted into the 20th century, though no one else went to jail. It took until 1972 for a similar law in Maryland to be overturned. That is to say, at so many points, and you know this already probably, the First Amendment's guarantee of religious freedom was interpreted to be the freedom to be any sort of Christian that you wanted to be. Well, the Reverend Abner Nealon served his 60 days of imprisonment and moved to Iowa to found a utopian community and died 6 years later at the age of 70. But instead of remembering him as the person most recently jailed for blasphemy, I want to remember him instead as one of the first vocal religious naturalists. He wrote this. He said, "I believe that the whole universe is nature," all capital letters. The whole universe is nature, and that the word nature embraces the whole universe. And so far as we can attach any rational idea to either, these are perfectly synonymous terms. Hence, he writes, hence I believe that God is in all, and that it is in God we live and move and have our being. And he does not mean that metaphorically, he means literally. In God, all of this is God. In other words, there's nothing supernatural in the universe. There's just nature, all of this stuff, the world. And when we speak of God, that to him is a synonym for nature, not meaning like wilderness and forest nature, but everything that is, the world itself, everything is holy with no separation between the sacred and the profane. Mundane is life-changing. In a beautiful piece of convergent evolution, this same theme emerges again about 25 years ago when a group of scientists and philosophers, among them Unitarian Universalists and atheists and humanists and spiritual but not religious and hardcore scientists who are skeptical of this religion thing but going to give it a shot and see how far they get, they all get together because they share a similar way of being religious, and they're trying to articulate what that is. They're trying to come up with their set of principles for their theological orientation to the world. As Unitarian Universalists, we have shared values. The 7 principles are one way of articulating them. Shared values, but different theologies behind those values. So we all share, for example, this trust, this belief in the inherent worth and dignity of each person. But you may have arrived at that place in a very different way than the person sitting next to you in this room right now arrived at that. For some people in this room, there might be a belief that because each of us is made in the image of God, we are deserving of inherent worth and dignity. And then the next person over on the pew might think that inside each of us there is something eternal and perfect and divine. And another you might think that, well, gosh, I just believe in the inherent worth and dignity because that's like what it is to be a person and be alive. Shared values, right? The inherent worth and dignity of each person. Different theologies, a different sense of what is going on with the universe that allows us to arrive at that shared value. And there's this sort of very difficult to describe to non-UUs, this sort of agreeable disagreement about this. You know, we're not in here arguing over who's got it exactly right every Sunday. I heard, someone told me this week that in the covenant that we say earlier in the service, and I had never picked this up from the front of the room, that some people end it by saying we seek the truth divine, and some people end it by saying we seek the truth sublime, which is fine, agreeable disagreement. So this group of religious naturalists at the turn of the millennia, chatting with each other on a Yahoo Groups mailing list. They had shared values, but they also did have a shared theology that they were trying to describe, religious naturalism. On the naturalist side of that, the cell biologist Ursula Goodenough writes, naturalism is most commonly used to describe a philosophical lineage that starts from the framework of materialism. The universe is constructed from matter and energy. That's all there is. All of this, us, chairs, the lights, everything. It's matter and energy put together in different and interesting and emergent combinations. So again, religious naturalism, not in the sense of birdwatching and tree identification naturalism, but naturalism as opposed to supernaturalism. The universe is just stuff. Why then religious? Well, the philosopher Loyal Rue, one of the people on the listserv, he describes it saying that this is a properly religious orientation to the world because it takes seriously three major aspects of what it is to be alive as a person. First, if you begin just with materialism, right? The universe is just stuff. Big Bang explodes things into existence. The early wave of stars collapse, supernova, again, on, all the way to planetary formation. And this epic of evolution that starts with stuff and continues on into these emergent forms, us among them. He says that story, the response to it, is an interpretive sphere. It is a space for meaning making. It is a story that allows us to begin to wonder at questions like, why is there anything at all rather than nothing? Does the universe have plan or purpose? How do we think about, what do we do with death? There's this interpretive aspect. Second, he says in that same story, material, nonetheless there is a spiritual sphere which describes inward responses to that narrative, to the fact of our existence. Responses like gratitude and awe and humility and reverence. Responses that for some are best accessed in community with others. And he writes too that there's a third dimension to this religious naturalism. There is a moral sphere, an outward communal response to the narrative. Things like compassion and fair-mindedness and respect. We don't just pluck this stuff out of thin air. If we take seriously, he says, if we take seriously just the plain fact of materialism of the universe, of our emergence out of that with nothing supernatural, nonetheless we arrive at that, not in a place of meaninglessness, but a place of meaning-making and deep moral commitment. In this way of believing, there is no traditional God who's all-powerful and all-knowing and all-good. There's no deity who dictates scripture and occasionally suspends the laws of nature. And for some religious naturalists, that's it. And for others, they hold a belief much more like Abner Neeland did, that God and nature are perfect synonyms for one another. And they use that language, that God language, not meaning a guy with a beard, but meaning nature in all capital letters. The physicist Chet Ramo talks about human knowledge as an island in the middle of this vast ocean of mystery. And as human knowledge grows larger, the ocean doesn't get smaller. In fact, what grows is the coastline where our understanding runs up against mystery. And for some religious naturalists, that ocean of mystery is holy or divine or synonymous with God. And for others, it's just the ocean of mystery. You don't need more labels for that thing. It's hard sometimes to explain this, to walk through this. For traditional religious Christians, folks for whom the question of God is at the center of what it means to be religious. And this is why Neeland was tried for blasphemy. He was not denying being religious. He still thought of himself as deeply religious. He was denying that there was a traditional Christian God. So, okay, how can a religious naturalist be religious without God? I suspect that for a lot of you, this is a nonsensical question because you are in fact religious without God, and it is Sunday morning and you're in church, and you have figured out the question. But for everybody else, for posterity, how can the religious naturalist be religious without God? Ursula Goodenough, in her lovely, lovely book, The Sacred Depths of Nature, where she pairs reflections on science and biology with reflections on meaning-making and her experience, she writes this. She says, if there is a major tension between an approach like religious naturalism and the monotheistic traditions, it centers on that question of whether or not one believes in a personal God. And most people raised in the context of theistic traditions would say that being religious means believing in God. And when you remind a person like that gods are not inherent to systems like Buddhism or Taoism, they likely question whether those are really religions and not something else like philosophies. But she continues, she says, for me, the concept of a personal, interested God can be appealing, often deeply so. She says, in times of sorrow or despair, I often wonder what it would be like to be able to pray to God or Allah or Jehovah or Mary and believe that I was heard, believe that my petitions might be answered. When I sing hymns of faith in Jesus' love, I'm drawn by their intimacy, their allure, their poetry. But in the end, she says, such faith is simply not accessible to me. I can't do it. I lack the resources to render my capacity for love and my need to be loved to supernatural beings. And so I have no choice but to pour these capacities and needs into earthly relationships, fragile and mortal and difficult as they often are. Theism versus non-theism, she writes, the choice has been presented to us as saved versus damned, holy versus heathen. But when I talk to thoughtful theists, I encounter not polarity, but a spectrum. Belief and faith for them in supernatural beings, when deeply wrought, it is as intensely personal and individual and dynamic as our earthly relationships. They add another dimension, another opportunity for relationship, to be sure. But those of us incapable of embracing that dimension remain flooded with opportunities to open ourselves to human relationships, and hence to fill our lives with the religious experience of love. Perhaps you have been a religious naturalist without knowing it, without knowing the label anyway. And I say all of this, of course, not to pull back the curtain and finally reveal this is the one true theology. No, agreeable disagreement. That's what we're here doing. But I share it in case you have been this and not known the label. With love at the center, attended by curiosity and compassion and awe, flanked by reverence and humility, shaping a life committed to making all those abstractions, those values real in how you live in the world, how you treat others, how you pay attention and move gently in this life. Can I tell you one more story? My wife, Reverend Terry, preached here last week, and she came home and she said, man, you really know what's going on in the room. Like they tell you what's happening. I appreciate that. It's good to be here together. All right, I'm going to tell you one more story. In the book of Exodus, Moses, raised in privilege, kills an Egyptian overseer of slaves and flees into the wilderness, finding a new life as a shepherd. And one day, out there in the wilderness, like any other day, grazing his flocks, he sees a bush which is burning but not consumed by fire. And approaching it, a voice speaks from, I'm gesturing to the chalice, a voice speaks from the flame, telling him he stands on holy ground and commissioning him to bring his people out from enslavement in Egypt. Now, in the millennia, between then and now, a burning bush moment has come to mean something so utterly unambiguous and compelling that you have to change your whole life, set out in an entirely new direction in answer to this perfectly clear command from a higher power. You may not be surprised that I lean towards a different interpretation. A different thread of interpretation about that moment on an ordinary and unremarkable day, on ordinary and unremarkable ground. One author says there is a commentary which suggests that Moses was not the first person to pass by the burning bush. Others had walked by and ignored it. Maybe they had assumed it was something other than what it was. Anyway, they had things to do, sheep to herd, goats to yell at. One way or another, as a result of their distraction, they missed the presence of God. In Hebrew, the Ruach HaKodesh, the divine force, the breath of the sacred, animate in the universe, manifest in plain sight. But not Moses. Moses had his eyes open. He noticed and marveled and altered his path to get a closer look. And in this way, Moses took the first step towards his relationship with the sacred, because as the text tells us, it wasn't until he had turned aside to look closely, that the divine in plain sight called out to him. Now, the literal meaning of miracles and voice never made sense to me. I can't suspend my disbelief at the impossibility of the physics, but if God and nature are perfectly synonymous, the story shifts and the meaning shifts. Because I do know what it is to pay attention and to see something beautiful, holy, in an unremarkable place, in an unremarkable moment. I know what it is to pay attention. A friend told me this. She said, it actually takes a long time to watch a bush burn enough to notice that it is on fire and not being consumed. You know, if you've sat around a campfire watching the logs go, it's not like, well, a quick glance assures you the bush is not being consumed. She says, look, perhaps the divine is waiting to speak to us in all sorts of places if only we slow down enough to pay attention and listen. To slow to pause, to listen, to watch, to notice this world. And in that act of paying attention, to find something wholly ordinary and holy nonetheless. We are here, writes Annie Dillard, meaning alive in the world with purpose. We are here to abet creation and to witness it. To notice each thing so that each thing gets noticed. Together we notice not only each mountain shadow and each stone on the beach, but we notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature so that creation need not play to an empty house. Amen. Will you rise in body or spirit? Let's sing together. You're paying attention. This is good. Slowing down.
This month, our entire offering goes to support the operating fund for our church. We are entirely self-sustaining through our own donations. We don't get money from the denomination, and income from rentals is important, but only a small sliver of our budget. Instead, we embrace the notion of self-governance and self-sustainability. We talk about money directly without guilt or shame or anxiety. The fact is, it takes money to make this place possible, this community possible, these connections possible. So the invitation always is equal generosity and not equal gifts. In that spirit, I invite you to give as generously as you are able. For those online, you can use the QR code or find a link in the video description. For those gathered here, you can also scan the QR code or make a donation as the ushers now pass the baskets. May our gifts be used to enact justice, bringing peace and love to the Boulder community.
Before we close our service, I have a few invitations. Choir members, chancel cats, folks, I invite you, grab a cup of coffee, gather with me in the Emerson room, and we'll talk a little about what comes next for the music program. Newcomers, grab a cup of coffee and gather in the listening room back there with our membership coordinator, Irene, and our religious education director, Rachel, and get to know this congregation a little better. Everyone else, no coffee for you until you fill out the talent and interest survey. Our closing words are a blessing by Jen Richardson, an encouragement to pay attention, to notice, to look for the holy, whatever name you give it. This called blessing at the burning bush. You will have to decide if you want this blessing that comes to you on an ordinary day when you are minding your own path, bent on the task before you that you have done 100 times before, 1,000. You will have to choose for yourself whether you will attend to the signs, whether you will open your eyes, open your ears, your heart, to the voice that tells you this place where you stand, this ground so familiar and therefore unregarded is in fact holy. No path from here could ever be ordinary again, could ever become unstrange to you whose seeing has been scorched beyond all salving. You will know your path not by how it shines before you, but how it burns within you, leaving you whole as you go from here blazing with your inarticulate, inescapable yes. Amen. Let's close in song.